Welcome, everyone. We're going to start with the short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratame. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha. Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Munie Soha.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. And as usual, we'll start with some meditation. So last week, towards the end of the class, we started looking at the third of the 4 close placements of mindfulness, and that is mindfulness of the mind. And I talked about some advice from the Dalai Lama, one practice that can be done in relation to mindfulness of the mind, and that is meditating on the impermanence of the mind. So we didn't have time to do that meditation last week, so I thought we could start with it tonight. So first of all, make sure that you're sitting in a comfortable position. Try to keep your back straight if you can. That helps the mind to be more awake and alert. But it's also important to be as relaxed as possible. That means not tense. So just make a quick check of your body and see if you do notice any tension anywhere in your body, like maybe in your shoulders, your neck, your back. And if there is any tension, see if you can just let it go. Sometimes just putting our awareness at a place where there's tension and kind of telling ourselves to relax, to let go of the tension, then that really helps to let go of at least some of it, if not all of it. And when we meditate, it's also important to put aside other thoughts. So there might be thoughts left over from things you were doing today, things that happened to you. So put those thoughts aside. You can always bring them up again later if you need to. But it's good to really try to keep our mind, our awareness on what we're doing in this class. So put aside thoughts of the past, also thoughts of the future, plans that you have for things you're going to do tonight, tomorrow, this weekend, and so on. Just let your mind be in the present moment right now, and also the present place wherever you are right now. And putting your attention on the breathing, just observing the breath as it flows in and out, is a helpful way of settling down in the present. Our breath is happening right here and now. So when we're watching the breath, our mind is in the here and now. So do that for a few minutes. And if your mind does wander away from the breath, just disengage from whatever other object your mind wandered to. Leave that aside and come back to the breath. And now, in order to make this session, this class that we're doing as beneficial as possible, both for yourself and for others, then it's best to generate an altruistic motivation as your reason for being here. So if you're comfortable with the idea of bodhicitta, you can bring that into your mind, thinking that you're here listening to these teachings in order to become a Buddha for the benefit of all living beings. But if you're not ready to aspire for full enlightenment, Buddhahood, then a similar motivation would be just wanting to help other persons, other beings as much as you can in your life, and wanting to learn ways that will enable you to be of benefit to others and not harm them, be a good, helpful person in your life. So that's one suggested motivation that is altruistic and very positive as your reason for being here. Okay, so then for the meditation, turn your awareness, your attention to your mind, which is like a stream, a flow of different mental states that include perceptions like hearing, smelling, tactile sensations, as well as thoughts, memories, feelings, emotions. So just see if you can kind of stand back from this flow of different mental states and just observe them. A bit like, if you're looking out a window onto a busy street and watching cars and buses and people and bicycles going by without getting involved in them, just watching them come, watching them go. So see if you can do that with your mind. And in case you find that difficult to do, you just ask yourself the question, what's happening in my mind right now? What is my mind doing? And don't try to stop any thoughts or perceptions from happening. Just allow them to happen and observe them without getting involved in them, judging them or thinking the thoughts. Just allow them to arise and pass and observe how they arise and pass. So see if you can notice how all these mental states are transitory. They rise, they last a moment, and then they disappear, giving rise to the next one, which also disappears, and so on. So it's like continuously changing flow or stream of mental events. See if you can notice that. And ask yourself if there's anything in your mind that is permanent, fixed, always the same, always there, without changing. So even though our mind is always changing, and there's actually nothing fixed and permanent there, the continuum of mind, the continuum of these mental states continues on, moment after moment, hour after hour, day after day. And this continues all throughout our life. There's never really a break in our mental events. It never stops. It never ceases, goes out of existence. It just continues all through our life. And it will continue right up to the end of our life, the point of death, dying. And it will continue after that, according to Buddhism. Our mind doesn't cease, doesn't stop existing. When we die, it continues to exist. It will take another life, another body, and continue to have experiences. And in fact, according to Mahayana Buddhism at least, the mind will never cease. It will never go out of existence. It will continue going, having experiences, and eventually, at some point, it will become enlightened mind, Buddha mind, blissful, free of all afflictive emotions, all delusions, all faults, fully developed in all positive qualities, completely pure and peaceful. And able to work for the benefit of all living beings, leading them out of suffering, leading them to enlightenment as well. So of course, this isn't something that will just happen naturally without our making any effort. We do have to make effort, create the causes for our mind to become enlightened mind. And the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are there to help us and guide us. So the Dalai Lama said that this meditation on the impermanent nature of the mind, how the mind is this continuously flowing, changing stream of mental events, that this understanding, this awareness can help ease fear of death. Because one reason people might be afraid of death is the fear of annihilation, like, I'm going to go out of existence. Everything's going to end. And that can be quite frightening. So that's something you can explore on your own. See if, becoming more aware of the impermanent nature of the mind and how the mind doesn't really cease, doesn't really stop. It continues beyond death and all the way to enlightenment. See if that gives some comfort to you with regard to the whole notion of death and dying. Okay, so before we go on, a few other things I wanted to say, because last week we had a discussion about pain, and I shared how, again from the Dalai Lama, how the practice of mindfulness of feeling can help to deal with pain. For example, if we feel pain when we're meditating, we can put our awareness on the pain and just notice it, be aware of it, watch it, and see how that changes. It's not a solid block, always there, always the same, but when we see how it changes, flows, moves, that can help us to ease the pain. So I just wanted to say that in case anyone thought that, what Buddhism says is if you have pain, you just have to meditate on it and not go to the doctor and not take any medication for it. So that's not the case, although there could be some people who do that. There could be some Buddhist practitioners who, don't want to take that kind of medication and just deal with pain with their mind. That's your choice. You do have that choice, but what I've learned from my teachers is it's fine to take medication, and in fact, pain is sometimes an indication of something serious. So if it's very severe and it continues, it doesn't stop, then it might be good to go and see a doctor and see if something that could be done about it. So anyway, just to make it clear that it is fine to do things to deal with pain, medication, or also if it comes up while you're sitting, it's fine to change your position. You don't have to just stay there and not move and endure this agony. Again, some practitioners of meditation do that. Some traditions ask you to do that, but that's not the case in our tradition. I've never heard my teachers talk about that. So it's fine to move. But before you do move, it is good to use mindfulness. Turn your mindfulness to the pain and just try to understand it better, explore it. And sometimes that might make the pain go away and you won't need to move. But if it doesn't go away, it is fine to change your position and move. And there's this verse from Shantideva. I can't remember the exact words, but it goes something like, what's the use of being unhappy about a problem if there's a remedy? And what's the use of being unhappy if there is no remedy? And so what he's saying there is if there's a problem and there's a remedy, a solution that you can apply, then do it. Try to take care of the problem. You don't have to just be miserable about it. So it is fine to turn to solutions, remedies for problems. But there are also cases where there isn't a remedy, there isn't a solution. So in that case, being unhappy doesn't help. So you can use other Dharma methods, Dharma practices to at least handle the mental unhappiness with regard to the problem. And also, I talked about how, according to Buddhism, pain is not an object of the mind. It's not something out there, like, located in our body, that our mind observes or perceives that pain as an object, but rather pain is part of the mental process. It's a mental factor. It's the mental factor of feeling. And so it's something subjective rather than objective. It's the subjective experience of something happening in the body. And so when I said that, pain is in the mind, don't think that means, sometimes people, when somebody has a problem, you're talking about a problem, and somebody will say, oh, it's all in your mind. That's kind of a very callous, unhelpful thing to say. It's just as if you're just making it up. It's not really there and you're just making it up. So saying pain is in the mind doesn't mean it's something our mind is inventing, fantasizing, and it doesn't actually exist. I mean, it is something that exists, although we sometimes exaggerate how bad it is. It may not be as bad as we think. So saying that pain is in the mind means that it is an aspect of the mind rather than the object. So it's something subjective. And again, we talked about how there are different, people have different experiences. And there are even people who don't experience pain. I saw a video. There was a video of this man who had a near-death experience. And what happened was he was skiing. And while he was skiing, he got into a kind of accident where his hand was injured, but he didn't take off his glove to look at what happened. He just kept skiing all day. And then at the end of the day, he did finally take off his glove, and it was like his hand was almost completely severed. And he didn't even notice, he didn't even feel anything. But, his friends took him to the hospital. And then while he was in the hospital and the doctors were, taking care of this serious injury, he went out of his body and he had this amazing near-death experience that totally changed his life. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that he I wouldn't be able to do that, keep skiing all day with a hand that's almost severed. But yeah, he said he had that ability to not kind of feel pain, not be bothered by pain. So there are people who are like that. And on the other hand, there are people who, the tiniest little scratch or cut, is like unbearable for them. So everyone has a different experience with pain. And that, shows that it is something subjective, some aspect of the mind, as opposed to something out there and over there. Okay, so let's carry on. If you could put the slides up. So last week we started looking at this third close placement of mindfulness, which is on the mind. And so, as you probably know, mind is a big topic in Buddhism. There's a lot of information about the mind, what it is, what its nature is, and different aspects of the mind, different types of mind, and so on. And I was thinking today about, this is a bit off the topic, but I don't pay a whole lot of attention to artificial intelligence, AI. But last year, I think it was, I read this article. It was an interview with this guy who's working on making robots. And he, if I remember correctly, he seemed to be quite confident that it was possible to make robots that have mind, that have consciousness. Although he did admit that it's difficult to determine if a robot really does have mind or not, because there's no agreement on what mind is, like among scientists, philosophers, and so on. There's lots of different theories about what mind is, what consciousness is, but but there's no consensus, no agreement on it. So until there is an agreement on what exactly mind is, what exactly consciousness is, then it wouldn't be possible to say that, oh, this robot or this machine has mind, has consciousness. But he seemed to think it was possible. And just so this morning I kind of Googled, to see what's there on this topic. And most of the articles that I saw seem to say that, yeah, robots and machines and so on, computers, don't have mind, don't have consciousness. And there was one article about a robot named Sophia. You may have heard of this. It's the first time I heard of it, but I guess a few years ago, this robot was made and became very famous and was on TV, was on talk shows and so on. So, it looks like a woman, very realistic looking appearance, and is able to, make facial expressions like human beings and talk, in a human voice, and make conversation, ask questions, and I don't feel comfortable saying she, even though it, had the appearance of a woman, but it wasn't really a woman, it was a robot. And yeah, but in this article it said that this robot, Sophia, is not sentient, is a machine that can mimic human-like characteristics, but doesn't have consciousness or emotions. It's a sophisticated technology that can learn and adapt to new situations over time. So I don't know why, but artificial intelligence is quite a kind of hot topic these days, and I'm aware that there's a lot of concern about, the ethical dimensions of all of this technology, maybe because of all the sci-fi movies about robots taking over the world. I don't know, maybe it could happen, but anyway, it's good to be aware, of possible dangers and try to avoid those. So let's hope that they do. But anyway, I was kind of relieved to see that, the majority of the articles on this topic did agree that robots and other machines that have artificial intelligence do not have mind, or do not have consciousness, do not have emotions, even though they can appear to have them. If it's a robot, they might show facial expressions and in their words, express emotions, but this is just mimicking human beings. They've been programmed to do that, but they don't actually have mind or consciousness as human beings do. So anyway, there are these three ways of practicing mindfulness of the mind, and these are from Following in the Buddha's Footsteps by the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron. So the first way is mindfulness of the impermanence of the mind. So we just did a meditation on that. And it's good, continue to explore that on your own. And then the second one is mindfulness of the conventional nature of the mind. This is its nature of being clear and knowing or cognizant. In the book Following in the Buddha's Footsteps, it uses that term, cognizant, instead of knowing. But I think normally, like in our low rate classes in the FPMT, we use the term clear and knowing. And so that's the conventional nature of the mind. And clear, the word clear or clarity, can mean different things. One meaning is it means that the mind is not physical. It's not made of physical particles, matter, like, molecules and atoms. So it doesn't have any physical properties at all, any material properties. And another meaning of clear is it's said that the way that our mind perceives objects is kind of similar to the way a mirror takes on images of things that are placed in front of it. So when we stand in front of a mirror, the mirror has, you know, this image of our face, our body, and you know, that's not something permanently there in the mirror, but it just happens because the nature of the mirror, that kind of material that it's made of to, you know, reflect images. And so it's said that the way that our mind works is similar to that. When we perceive an object, for example, you know, looking at a phone, then the way the mind perceives the phone is that it takes on an aspect of the phone, meaning like, yeah, like a mirror, mirror taking on the aspect. It rises in the aspect. I've, you know, I have to admit, I've never really understood that. I've tried to understand it, but it's kind of difficult. But I guess this is something you can observe yourself when you get a really good understanding of the nature of the mind. I'll talk more about that in a bit. But yeah, it's yeah, like a clear mirror. Our mind reflects the objects that we perceive. Another meaning of clear is that the afflictions like greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on, all the disturbing thoughts and emotions, those are not permanent aspects of the mind that will be there forever and cannot be eliminated, but they are said to be adventitious, meaning, you know, they can be removed. So I like the analogy of water. Water by nature is clear. If it's pure water, like coming from a spring, you know, an artesian well, or, you know, one of these wonderful places where the water is just coming up from the earth and it's totally pure and clear and clean. So that's the nature of water. But water sometimes gets polluted. If you dump dirt or soap or chemicals into the water, then it gets dirty. But that stuff isn't, you know, a permanent part of the water. It's been added, and it can be removed as well. There's really good technology to remove pollutants in water and make it really clean and clear again. So that similar with our mind. The nature of our mind is clear, meaning the pollution in the mind, greed, hatred, ignorance, pride, jealousy, and so on, all those afflictive states, they are not permanently part of the mind. They're like pollution that can be removed and then the mind restored to its clear nature. So there's various meanings of clear. You can take your pick, which of those you find you're most comfortable with. And then the second term, knowing or cognizant, that refers to the function of the mind, what the mind does, how it works. It knows things. It is aware of things. It experiences things. So those are all different terms that hopefully will help you understand the mind. That's its nature. That's what it does. It knows, it feels, it perceives, it experiences, it is aware. Okay. And there's always an object. Yeah. There's always something that the mind is aware of, or something that it experiences. According to, at least this is how my teachers explain it, you can never have mind without an object. Mind and object. There always has to be an object of the mind. So then, how to be mindful of the conventional nature of the mind. So the Dalai Lama talks about this in the book Following the Buddha's Footsteps, and also in another volume of that series, which is called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion. So Following the Buddha's Footsteps is volume 4, and in volume 2, which is called The Foundation of Buddhist Thought, the Dalai Lama also talks about the nature of the mind and how to recognize the nature of the mind. So basically he says you need to be in a quiet situation and have a calm mind. So maybe do some meditation on the breath for a while to calm your mind down. And then you need to stop the ordinary activity of the mind, which is chasing after sense objects, or maybe chasing after isn't the right word, but paying attention to sense objects, okay, like sounds and smells and tactile sensations and so on. So much of the time our mind is occupied with objects of our senses, and also thoughts. Thoughts coming up, memories and reflections and fantasies, plans, and so on. A lot of that kind of activity as well. So you have to stop all of that, which of course is not easy to do. But then, he says if you can stop the usual mental activity, then you can get a glimpse of the clear and knowing nature of the mind. So he says the mind is usually invaded by a host of constructive and destructive thoughts that concern external objects and people we have perceived or experienced. These cloud the clear and knowing nature of the mind, preventing us from perceiving it. So, like, the clear and knowing nature of our mind is there all the time, constantly, but we don't see it because we pay more attention to objects, like objects of our senses, objects of our thoughts and memories and so on. So we're so much caught up in the objects, we can't see the mind itself. And he says, when the flow of thoughts slows down, it is possible to see into the depths of the mind, its clear and cognizant nature that is like a still pool of water. That's a beautiful analogy. Like in a forest, if there's a pool of water and there's nothing that's moving it, disturbing it, it's just completely calm and still. So he says, one technique for discovering the conventional nature of the mind is to prevent the mind from arising in the aspect of those objects, and to stop all conceptual thoughts regarding past and future events. To do this, first generate a strong determination not to let your mind be disturbed by sense perceptions such as sounds or thoughts. Let your mind rest without being overrun by sensory perceptions or ideas. At first, it may seem that more thoughts than usual arise, but this is not the case. It is simply that in your daily life, you do not pay much attention to how many thoughts there are. Continuing to meditate in this way, you will gradually be able to keep the mind at a distance from sense objects, and the barrage of thoughts will diminish and eventually cease. By the mind not arising in the aspects of those objects, the clear nature of mind will become apparent. When you experience your mind in the absence of thoughts about the past and the future, you will have a sense of vacuity, which is the gap between the mind and those objects. I remember Lama Yeshe talking about that. Oh no, he said it more like, look for the mind in between thoughts, between one thought and another. The gap. He talked about a gap between one thought and another. But I always had trouble with that because my mind's like a machine gun, just I wasn't able to see any gap between one thought and another. But yeah, they do talk about that it is possible to notice this gap. So he calls it a sense of vacuity. And he says this vacuity is not the ultimate nature of the mind. It's not the emptiness of inherent existence of the mind, nor is it nothingness, as in blank-minded meditation. So it isn't just a question of making your mind blank and experiencing nothing. You are actually experiencing the nature of the mind. Once you experience that vacuous state of mind, try to meditate or remain in it. Eventually, you will have a feeling that the mind is something like a mirror with infinite dimensions. At that time, the nature of the mind itself is clear. Yet, whenever the mind contacts an object, a reflection immediately arises. In this way, understand the mirror-like clarity of the mind. The mind remains clear by nature, even though reflections of phenomena may appear in it. And His Holiness went on to say that one time he was in Ladakh, which is way up in the mountains, and he did a 1-month retreat there. And during that retreat, he did get a glimpse of the nature of the mind that he's talking about here. But then he said after that retreat, when he returned to his usual busy lifestyle, he came back to his original state. So it sounds like it was hard to maintain that experience of the clear nature of the mind when he was busy. So it sounds like you do need to be in sort of special conditions, like in a retreat situation. Yeah, so if you find it difficult to have this experience of getting in touch with the clear nature of the mind, we shouldn't feel bad about that. Even the Dalai Lama had difficulty keeping it up in his usual routine. And then he goes on to talk about how, when you do get this experience of the clear and knowing nature of the mind, then you can recognize how this nature of the mind, the natural state of the mind, is free of the destructive emotions, like greed, hatred, ignorance, that they are not like always there, fixed, permanent aspects of the mind. So then that really helps us to understand that it's possible to free the mind, to separate the mind from the disturbing emotions. We see for ourselves that, they're not permanent fixtures in our mind. So that must be quite helpful to realize, oh, okay, there's the clear and knowing nature of the mind, and then there are these disturbing thoughts and emotions. They're not one and the same thing. Yeah, so he says, seeing this nature of the mind, we understand it is possible to put an end to mental defilements. And also, he says, we recognize how the mind is impermanent, constantly changing. And from this point also, it's possible to understand that it's possible to abandon mental defilements. So so anyway, with that second meditation here, we can get our own firsthand experience of how it's possible for the mind to be separate from disturbing emotions. And then we understand it's possible to abandon those. And then he says, through these two insights, that disturbing emotions are not in the very nature of the mind, and also that thoughts are transient, we can see the possibility of eliminating mental defilements and know that attaining true cessations is possible. And so this is why this third practice of mindfulness, mindfulness of the mind, is connected with the third of the Four Noble Truths, which is true cessations. True cessations is when at least some portion of afflictions, delusions have been abandoned forever and they will never arise again. So it doesn't happen all at once, but gradually, in stages, you get rid of the mental defilements. That's the meaning of true cessation. So there's a connection between that mindfulness of the mind and understanding true cessations, the third noble truth. Okay. And then the third of these ways to practice mindfulness with mind is mindfulness of the emptiness of the I. This is probably more difficult, more subtle, but anyway, I'll explain what His Holiness said. He said mindfulness of the mind can help to realize the selflessness of persons. So what that means is, we normally have a sense of a real solid I or me, or who I am, what I am. And the Dalai Lama says sometimes our sense of I is related more to our body. Yeah. For example, when we think, I am a human being, I am a man, I am a woman, or I am non-binary, or whatever your choice of gender is, or when we feel I am tall, I am short, I am young, I am old. So when we have those kinds of thoughts or feelings, then our sense of I is connected more with our body. Also, when we're doing things, we say, I am cooking, I am walking, I am building a house or painting a picture. So then our, sense of I is connected with our body and what our body is doing. But at other times, our sense of I may be more connected with our mind. For example, when we think I'm intelligent, or I'm stupid, or I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a Christian, I'm happy, I'm unhappy. Okay. So in those situations, our sense of I is more related to our mind, what's going on in our mind. But nevertheless, we still feel there's a real I, a real me, who is all these things. And so then the Dalai Lama says that, when we're practicing these 4 establishments of mindfulness, progressively starting with the first one on the body, when we're meditating with mindfulness on the body, let me see. He says, when investigating the nature of the body, it feels like there is a solid I that's doing this investigation. I am investigating my body. And the same with feelings. When we're doing mindfulness with the feelings, there's a feeling of an I that is investigating our feelings. And this I seems to be kind of separate from our body, separate from our feelings, and looking at them, noticing them, experiencing them. And likewise with the mind, when we're doing the practice of mindfulness of the mind, again, it may feel that there's a separate I that's doing this investigation, investigating the mind. But wait a minute, what? Where is that I? What is that I? So he doesn't really answer that question, but what I've learned from other sources and discussion with people and so on, it seems that when we are observing our mind, like we were doing at the beginning of the class today, looking at our mind, what's going on there is one part of the mind is observing the other parts of the mind. And that one part of the mind that is doing the observing could be mindfulness, the mental factor of mindfulness. It could be the mental factor of introspective awareness. So it's, some part of the mind, one aspect of the mind is paying attention to, looking at, observing, investigating other aspects of the mind, and able to notice, oh, there's anger, or there's a pleasant feeling, or whatever. So it's just all happening within our mind. And it isn't the case that there is an I, a me, that is somewhere inside and is doing this investigation, looking at the mind. It seems like that, okay? It may seem as if there is this I that's watching and investigating, but it's not really. It's just one part of the mind. But this is what we need to investigate. Okay, so when we do have a sense of an I that seems to be there somewhere inside of us, doing meditation, doing analysis, thinking, wondering, and so on, that's what we need to investigate. What is that I? Does it exist the way it appears? Is it really something separate from the mind, separate from the body and the mind? And I mean, he doesn't sort of go into all the details of that, but that's normally found in the teachings on emptiness, where we apply our understanding of emptiness to different phenomena, different objects. And so if there was such a thing as a I that's separate from the body and the mind, and controlling the body and the mind, making decisions, doing things like meditating, we should be able to find it when we search for it. We should be able to look through our body and mind, our aggregates, and find that I, that standalone, autonomous, existing all on its own. But when doing that kind of investigation, then it's hard. In fact, if you do it right, you won't find that kind of an I, because it doesn't exist. It's just an appearance, like a fantasy, but not really there. And instead, there is an I that meditates. We can say, I am meditating, but that I is just what is named or labeled or imputed in relation to body and mind, the merely labeled I. So that's kind of a more advanced practice to do. Good to start with the first one, meditating on the impermanence of the mind, and that way you get more familiar with the mind and how there's all these different mental states, mental events arising and passing. None of them are permanent. None of them are constant, always there, always the same. So getting more familiar with that is very helpful to then later understand that there is no real, fixed, permanent I or me or myself anywhere within the mind. And also understanding the emptiness of the I, again, is connected with the third of the Four Noble Truths, true cessations, because that is how true cessations come about. We attain true cessations by realizing emptiness, the emptiness of the I, the emptiness of all phenomena, whatever exists. That realization of emptiness is the thing that enables our mind to abandon disturbing emotions, create hatred, ignorance, and so on. So let's stop there. It's time for our halftime break. So we'll have a 5-minute break and then come back and do a little bit more on this topic. Okay, just got a little bit more on this topic before we move to the next one. So next slide. Yeah, final instructions on this particular type of mindfulness of the mind. And this is from the Satipatthana Sutra. That's the sutra where the Buddha is explaining the practice of the 4 post placements of mindfulness, or 4 establishments of mindfulness. So at the end of each of the 4, the Buddha kind of talks about, contemplating the mind in different ways. So here it says contemplating mind in and of itself internally. That means your own mind internally within yourself. So you observe your own mind and observe its nature, understand the mind in yourself. And then the second one, it says contemplating mind in and of itself externally. And so part of the practice is to also observe the minds of others. Now you might wonder how that's possible. Can you read the minds of others? I mean, some people can. There is something called clairvoyance, the ability to see the minds of others, what their thoughts are, what's going on in their minds. So Buddhism talks about this, and it's something that can be developed on the basis of very strong concentration. So some people have that ability, but even if we don't, we can still practice to a certain extent, like just just reminding ourselves other people, other beings have minds too, just like we do. And within their minds, they have different kinds of thoughts and different emotions. And we can sometimes get a sense of what is going on in somebody's mind. For example, observing their facial expressions, observing their body language, what their body's doing. You can get some sense that maybe somebody's frightened, or they're agitated, or they're angry. Yeah. So that could be included in contemplating the mind of, others externally. And yeah, it's also useful like in developing bodhicitta, love and compassion and so on. One of the meditations we do is contemplating that everybody wants happiness just like we do, and nobody wants suffering just like we do. So that's kind of a simple idea, but it's very helpful. It's very helpful to keep that in mind and have that there in your interactions with other people, your perceptions of other people, your observations of other people, and you should be able to confirm it by observing people, that they want to be happy, they want to have good experiences, and they don't want suffering, pain, bad experiences. So it's contemplating the minds of others and understanding at least that basic fact or reality. They want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. And that's really helpful, really important, especially when it comes to practicing ethics. The basis of ethics is understanding nobody wants to suffer. And just like we do, we don't want to suffer. We don't want people to be mean to us and hurt us. Well, other people feel that way too. And I'm going to respect that. I'm going to really try not to hurt them. not to cause them any suffering as much as possible. And instead, I'm going to try to do what will make them happy, bring them happiness. That's what they want. Yeah, so that's kind of connected with observing the minds of others. And then third one is contemplating mind in and of itself, both internally and externally. So that means you, in your practice, you would alternate, sometimes paying more attention to your mind, sometimes paying more attention to the minds of others, and yeah, doing both at different times. And then fourth is contemplating the arising and passing away of mind. So that refers to impermanence. So as you're observing your mind, then trying to observe how all the different mental states, happy, unhappy, positive, negative, and so on, are temporary, transitory. They come and they go, they arise and pass. And then contemplating there is a mind. So what that means is after being familiar with various characteristics of different states of mind, then you can identify them quickly and easily. Observe the mental process itself with mindfulness, and through this dwell without clinging. So that's a kind of higher level of the practice. Once you've gained familiarity in the other ones, the previous ones, then you don't have to be thinking about different types of mind or the impermanence of the mind. You can just dwell in a state where you're just observing the mind. Maybe that's similar to what the Dalai Lama was talking about, just observing the clear and knowing nature of the mind. And then finally, abiding freely, not clinging to anything in the world. So as a result of this practice and the other practices of mindfulness, then you're able to, free yourself from attachment, aversion towards things in the world, and just abide in a very free state. I'm not talking, this is the Buddha talking, not me. I have no experience of that, but this is the result of doing this practice. And then at the end of this section in the book, Following the Buddha's Footsteps, at the end of talking about mindfulness of the mind, the Dalai Lama says, as with mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind can be done as either a temporary practice or as the main practice. So you can choose, how you want to practice these different mindfulnesses. It's generally recommended to go in a progressive order, starting with mindfulness of the body and really get familiar with that and get, good practice of that. Then go on to mindfulness of feelings and work with that. And then on the basis of that, work with mindfulness of the mind. And when you're familiar with all the different types of mindfulness, then you can, alternate between one and the other. And he says, when our primary meditation object is not the mind, for example, when it's breathing, if we're primarily meditating on breathing or feelings or whatever, then we are mindful of the mind in order to prevent non-virtuous mental states from taking over or becoming habitual. Okay, so it's always good to have mindfulness of the mind in the sense of watching the mind and looking out for the arisal of negative states like anger and craving and so on, and not, letting those take over the mind. When mindfulness of the mind is the main practice, we may begin the meditation session by observing the breath to settle the mind and then turn our mindfulness to the mind itself, observing whatever mental state is present without clinging to it or pushing it away. So there's different ways of using each of these 4 close placements of mindfulness. You can choose to mainly focus on one of them, or you can kind of complement one with another. Okay, so we finished with that particular mindfulness, and we'll now move on to mindfulness of phenomena, which is the 4th and final one. But if any of you have a question about any of the things I talked about with mindfulness of the mind, please, you can ask now. I can't see anyone. Effie, you'll have to tell me if somebody. Okay.
I don't see anyone either. We've got a quiet group tonight.
Okay. Well, we'll save some time at the end. Oh, Wangmo, you have your hand up. Please unmute and ask.
Yeah, thank you for these teachings. Does this mindfulness of the mind and these meditations on the mind, and kind of these final instructions, these steps, does this lead to like being able to meditate on the clear light mind, like that I've heard in teachings? Or is this something just kind of preparation for that eventually? Or is it the same thing?
Well, the term clear light is a little complicated because it can mean different things. And usually when they use the term clear light, it's, well, maybe I shouldn't say usually, but it's used in the sutras. There's a sutra way of explaining the clear light nature of the mind. But there's also in Tantra, in highest yoga Tantra, a way of explaining the clear light nature of the mind. So in Sutra, I think the Sutra explanation of clear light nature of the mind is probably the same as what His Holiness was talking about, in the previous slide, where the clear knowing nature of the mind, and how the defilements, the afflictions, greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on, are not permanent fixtures in the mind, but are transitory and adventitious. So when they explain the clear light nature of the mind in sutra, the sutra aspect, then that's usually what they explain. And that even in the Pali Canon, even in the Pali Sutra, the Buddha used this term, clear light. He said the nature, it's translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi as luminous, in his translation, luminous, but it's the same term. So it could be translated as luminous, it could be translated as clear light. And so the Buddha spoke about that. And the way it's explained, the way it's understood, is that what that means is that, the basic nature of the mind, the natural nature of the mind, is not deluded, is not afflicted. The afflictions, the delusions, all these disturbing thoughts and emotions are just transitory, and they can be removed. So yes, definitely, I think this kind of practice would lead to a greater understanding of the clear light nature of the mind in the sutra aspect. And in the Tantra, well, that's another thing. There are other practices in highest yoga Tantra for accessing, getting in touch with that's a subtler level of mind. It's called the most subtle clear light mind. That's only explained in highest yoga Tantra, and within that tradition there are certain practices for accessing that. But still, I think, gaining more experience of the mindfulness of the mind would certainly contribute to that eventually. Yeah, so I don't know if you were following Venerable Children's teachings, the last 3 chapters, I think, of Samsara, Nirvana, Buddha, Nature, talks about all these different meanings of clear light, and it can be kind of complicated, but very beautiful, very inspiring. Okay, so we'll leave some time at
Wait,
the
Jessica has her hand raised. So
end.
just go ahead and unmute, baby.
Okay, this is, hi Venerable. This is less of a question and more of an observation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking about what you're talking about with AI and if it has a mind. And I teach language, and there's a big upset right now with ChatGPT and how students are using ChatGPT to write their responses, to help them think, to help them do searches, to help them do everything. And there's some minimal aspects of that. But then there's this idea of how it's integrating into people's thought processes as well. If people aren't given a chance to question things and use their own critical thinking, and they're just going to scripts or algorithms to present their ideas, and I teach English language, and so people are coming into my classes to learn how to think in English or how to express their thinking in English. And so I was just wondering, so it's an observation and then there's a wonder that comes from it. What happens when people share the same algorithms? Does that become a kind of mind? Or is that, does that make sense? A kind of consciousness of its own.
If people are sharing the
So
same algorithm.
if the algorithms are programming people's thinking, and it's the same, they're sharing it, does that create its own consciousness?
I don't really understand what an algorithm is. I mean, what is it? Is it something, part
I
of
think of it as a formula.
a formula, and it's inserted into.
So then people start thinking in formulas.
Hmm?
Then people will start thinking in the same types of formulas.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is something maybe this is not the right place for this to, I just have questions and ideas, and I'm wondering how that relates to mind and consciousness.
Well, I mean, what pops up into my mind is that it's not so different from, let's say, people watching the same TV program or the same advertisement on on TV. And, that's kind of giving them certain messages and getting them to think in certain ways. So even before ChatGPT, I think there were kind of similar situations. Also in education too, in some education systems, students are not taught to think for themselves. And instead, it's rote learning. You have to learn this material and memorize it and then repeat it back when you have a test or an exam, and you're not allowed to make your own comments. And I've heard there are some cultures, some societies where they have that kind of system for education. So it's kind of similar to what you're talking about. Yeah, so I don't really know. I don't know that much about things like ChatGPT, whatever it is, ChatGPT. I think I tried it a couple of times just to experiment with it. But I also have to say, I have I'm what do you call it? An elder for one of the FPMT online programs, and when when a person signs up for one of these programs, they're supposed to you know, listen to the material, read the material, do meditations, and then respond to certain questions. And so recently there was somebody who was sending me these responses, and I just felt like, you know, the questions they were asking the person, what do you think about this? Or what was your experience with this meditation? And the responses this person was making was, I thought they were probably using ChatGPT, because it was just very, you know, very general and vague, and saying things like, oh, one would feel da 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 da. So it was not at all talking about their own personal experience. And I tried to get the person, you know, to answer differently, to talk about their experience, but they didn't. Maybe they were just too shy or you know, unable to do that. But yeah, it was quite unpleasant having to deal with those kinds of answers. So I don't know if this is what teachers experience when they're reading students' responses.
It's exactly what I'm referring to. This missing of a person in their experience about something,
Yeah.
but feeling inclined to write the perfect answer or give a perfect answer, and then in doing that, they all become very similar answers that are based on algorithms. I guess that when I say algorithms, I mean it goes back in. This is abstract. I'm not a computer scientist or a programmer, but they'll write themselves, and based on what people are answering and what they're inputting, and if it's always the same, then I don't know. I'm not going to be afraid of it, but I'm just curious how it reflects in a mind or consciousness, and if there's impact on that.
Well, I'd have to think about this, and maybe next week I'll come up with some thoughts. It's, you know, it's kind of a new situation that, you know, is just recently
and fast changing.
But I've also heard, you know, how frustrating it is for teachers, because, you know, students are using these artificial intelligence programs to write their papers for them, and it's like cheating. You know, you're not doing this work yourself. So how can you learn if you're not, you know, using your own mind to study and understand the material and then write papers? So I can imagine there must be a lot of frustration and concern, you know, what's going to come in the future if this keeps happening. But I don't know. I don't know enough about it all to be able to say much more than that right now.
I'll keep on my inquiry too, as it relates to mind and consciousness. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next and final of the 4 mindfulnesses, which is called mindfulness of phenomena. And the term phenomena in Buddhism, phenomena is plural, phenomenon is singular, is used for anything that exists. So a phenomenon, Dharma, you know, the term in Sanskrit is Dharma. The term Dharma can have different meanings. We use the term Dharma to talk about, you know, the Buddhist teachings and the practices we do. But the term Dharma can also have other meanings. So one meaning is phenomena, just something that exists. So anything that exists is a phenomenon. Doesn't have to be anything special, as long as it exists. So what's included in this mindfulness of phenomena? So there's different systems. So I'll start this time with our system, the Mahayana system. And Jetsun Chukyi Gelsen, he's again the textbook writer for Serije Monastery. And so he says that in this context, when we're practicing close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, that includes all phenomena other than the previous three. So whatever's left over, that isn't in the previous three, meaning the body, the first one, body, feelings, and then mind. So anything that exists that it isn't included in those three is included in this fourth type of mindfulness. So what that means is all permanent phenomena, things that are permanent, abstract composites, that's another term for, sometimes called non-associated compositional factors. Those are impermanent things that are neither form nor mind. It's like all impermanent phenomena that aren't form and that aren't mind are in this category of abstract composites. So those includes things like time, time, and all the different types of time, like hour, minute, second, and so on. Also persons. Those are abstract composites. Persons exist. We all exist, but what a person is neither form nor consciousness. It's another kind of impermanent phenomenon. So anyway, abstract composites. And then all mental factors other than feeling. So all the other mental factors, because feeling was already in the second of the close placements of mindfulness. So all the other mental factors are included here. So it's everything left over that isn't included in the previous three. And then Lama Tsongkhapa, in his commentary to the Ornament for Clear Realization, he says that the main phenomena to be mindful of here are those to be abandoned, things to be abandoned, which are mainly the mental afflictions, obscurations, all the things in the mind that we want to get rid of to attain liberation and enlightenment. And second, those to be developed, things we want to develop, which are beneficial mental qualities. Those are the main phenomena to be mindful of in this this fourth close placement of mindfulness. And this fourth one, the close placement of mindfulness, is correlated with the fourth noble truth, the true paths. And true paths are mainly the realization of emptiness, the direct realization of emptiness. That's the main true path, because that is what enables the mind to become free of afflictions, obscurations, and attain true cessations. So true paths is the way to attain true cessations. And so by practicing mindfulness phenomena, we are able to attain true paths, because we overcome the afflictions that are the cause of suffering and samsara, and we cultivate the positive qualities of mind, like love, compassion, but also wisdom. Wisdom is one of the things we need to develop, and that will enable us to attain true paths. So Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation, what he says about this, is kind of similar to the Pali tradition. We'll look at that next slide. In the Pali explanation of mindfulness phenomena, this is based on the Satipatthana Sutra. So this is a little more complicated, but this is the Buddha's words, what the Buddha explained in the Satipatthana Sutra. So he went through 5 sets or 5 groups of phenomena to be mindful of. So I'll just briefly go through these. We won't go into detail with all of them, but the first group are called the 5 hindrances. So the 5 hindrances are mental states that hinder our attainment of concentration. So they are obstacles to concentration. So we need to be mindful of those. We need to observe them in our mind when they arise, so that we can overcome them and develop concentration. Concentration is a very important tool to be able to progress along the path. And the next slide, I'll go into the actual 5 hindrances. We won't have time to go through all of them, but we can at least start. And then number 2 is the 5 aggregates. You're probably familiar with that. This is the Buddhist explanation of what we are, the things that make us up: form, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousness. So it's dividing a person up into these 5 things. So mindfulness of the 5 aggregates is to understand their nature, that they are impermanent, that they are dukkha, or suffering, unsatisfactoriness, and that they are selfless. And so, that's why we need to be mindful of our 5 aggregates, so that we stop having attachment to them and wanting to get new sets of 5 aggregates again and again and again, life after life, and instead go for nirvana, liberation. Then the third group are called the 12 sources. So sources, the term source here means these are sources of consciousness. So we have 6 types of consciousness, 5 related to our senses, and then the 6th consciousness is the mental consciousness. So the 12 sources are the things that give rise to our 6 consciousnesses. And so they are the 6 sense powers are organs. So the eye and the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and also the 6 types of objects, visual objects, sounds, and so on and so forth. So, so having these 6 organs or sense bases, sense powers, and then 6 types of objects that are perceived, these are what give rise to the 6 types of consciousness: seeing, hearing, smelling, and so forth. So what we need to be mindful of is how the existence of these 12 sources can lead to suffering. Not necessarily, but they can lead to suffering because, for example, if there's a pleasant object, an attractive object, a visual object, so having that attractive object there in front of us and having a functioning eye organ, eye sense power, then we can have this experience of seeing, visual consciousness, seeing that attractive object. And then once it's seen, because of other factors in our mind, we have a pleasant feeling, and that usually leads to attachment, to craving, to clinging. And then if we act on that, then we're creating the cause for more samsara, more suffering. And so, so it's important to understand how our mind works, how consciousnesses arise. And if we're not, able to control our mind, then we can create the cause for more suffering. The 4th group is the 7 awakening factors, or sometimes called 7 factors of enlightenment. These are not so talked about in our tradition. They're talked about a lot in the Pali tradition, but they do exist in the Mahayana tradition. It's just that they're not so famous. And the reason they are called awakening factors is because they help us get awakened. They help us attain enlightenment. And the 7 are the awakening factors of mindfulness, investigation, effort or energy, joy, pliancy, concentration, and equanimity. And so these are things that we need to cultivate. Both bodhisattvas who want to attain enlightenment, as well as shravakas and solitary realizers who aim for nirvana. So we all have to cultivate those. And these are actually included in the 37 harmonies. So once I finish with these 4 close placements of mindfulness, which are just the first 4 of the 37 harmonies, I will kind of quickly go through the rest of those. So we will encounter these again, these 7 awakening factors. So, so we use mindfulness to be able to cultivate these 7 awakening factors. And then the last group are the 4 truths, 4 noble truths, or 4 truths of the Aryas: true suffering, true origins of suffering, true cessations, and true paths. And so a practitioner will develop those 7 awakening factors in group 4, and will, on the basis of developing concentration and gaining insight into the other groups, like the 5 aggregates and the 12 sources. So on the basis of that, they can penetrate the Dharma, meaning realize the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, by means of the 4 Arya truths. They will be able to get actual realizations of the 4 truths, especially the last 2. The first 2 truths are things we want to get rid of, we want to abandon: true suffering and true origins. And the last 2 truths are what we want to gain, to realize: true cessations and true paths. So there's quite a lot of phenomena here to be mindful of, but by practicing mindfulness of these 5 types of phenomena, then one will be able to attain liberation, nirvana. So we don't have time to go through all of them, but I thought it would be useful to look at the first group, the 5 hindrances, because those are also not explained so much in our tradition. So the next slide has a chart of these and antidotes, what we can do about them. So these 5 hindrances, again, are things that come up in our mind when we're trying to meditate and can disrupt our meditation so that we have trouble developing concentration. And there's another group of 5, I don't know if they're called hindrances or obstacles in the teachings on calm abiding, how to develop calm abiding. There you also have a list of 5 obstacles, but those are different. Those are like forgetfulness, laziness, and so on. So this is a different group, but I think it's good to look at these because they are hindrances, that things that happen to us and interfere with our meditation practice. So it's good to be aware of them and know how to deal with them. So the first one is sensual desire. So sensual desire is attachment or desire for attractive objects, pleasant objects, especially with our 5 senses, things that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. So with our 5 senses, we are able to contact these 5 kinds of objects, and if we find them pleasant, then we usually get attached to them. And that can hinder our practice of meditation. For example, if you hear some beautiful music, nice music, while you're meditating, one of your neighbors is playing some nice music, then it's very hard to not be distracted by that, and your mind is, getting into that, and you lose your concentration. Another thing that can happen is memories of pleasant objects that we saw or heard or experienced in different ways. So these memories can come up in our mind, and our mind can get all caught up in that desire, wanting to re-experience that nice object, so we can start getting into stories and wanting to go back and have that experience again, and so on. So it's a big obstacle, big hindrance in meditation. And of the five senses, it's said that the probably the strongest kind of desire that we have is sexual desire. So for probably most people, sexual desire is stronger than desire for other types of sensory experiences. And so again, that can be a hindrance in meditation. Thoughts, fantasies, memories, and so on can come up and distract your mind from meditation. So the first thing we need to do is be aware of it. Notice when it arises in our mind, and be aware that this is a hindrance to meditation, to concentration, to following the path. And that doesn't mean beat yourself up, think, oh, I'm a horrible person because I have desire. That's not helpful at all. Everybody has it. As long as we're still in samsara, we're still ordinary beings who haven't realized emptiness, we all have this problem. So it's just normal, and it's something to be overcome, but you can't overcome it right away. You can't get rid of it right away. So we first need to notice it, be aware of it, and we need to recognize that it is problematic. So one of the antidotes, I put two antidotes here. One is to contemplate impermanence. So that is a good antidote to desire. If you remind yourself that the objects that we get attracted to and attached to are impermanent, not permanent. They come and they go, they change. They don't always remain attractive and beautiful and pleasing, but they change. And that can help to decrease the desire. Also the pleasure itself, the pleasure that we get from enjoying objects of our senses, that's also impermanent. That lasts a few seconds, a few minutes. It's not long lasting at all. So understanding that can help us to not be so attracted to, not so attached to such objects and experiences. So that's one antidote. Another one is shortcomings. The shortcomings or limitations, you could say, of sense objects. How, again, mainly because they're impermanent, they're not reliable. We can't really get long-lasting, genuine happiness and pleasure from those objects. So it's best to use our own experience with this and not just say, oh, Buddha said desire is bad and I should get rid of it. That's not going to work. But explore your own experiences, and also looking, around in the world, your friends, your family, and try to recognize how, most people in the world are chasing after objects of the senses, wanting more and better. But where does that lead? Do they really find genuine peace and happiness and satisfaction? If they did, then the people with the most stuff would be the happiest people in the world. But usually that's not the case. Yeah. I don't know if this is related, but I was at a kind of meeting with, people involved in the business world who are learning about mindfulness and meditation. And one of them said that, this was some years ago, but it's probably still true. That, nowadays there are some people who reach the peak of their career by the time they're 30 or even younger. They kind of have achieved as much as they can, the highest, state or situation that they could reach. And they get there and they realize they're not really happy, that this isn't really how they thought it would be. They feel it's kind of empty, and there's nothing more, nowhere else for them to go, no higher for them to go. I didn't completely understand what he was saying, but I figured he knows what he's talking about because he was in that world, and also, fortunately, realized that, this wasn't the answer to everything, and was looking elsewhere to spiritual practice for the answer. But that's kind of, an illustration of this, that there are lots of people who have that experience. Like, you have everything, lots of money, lots of friends, everything that you could possibly have and enjoy, and you still feel empty. Sometimes people even commit suicide. I remember this woman just a couple of years ago, I don't remember her name, exquisitely beautiful. She was like a beauty queen. She'd actually won titles, beauty queen titles. She was very intelligent. She was a lawyer, and she had her own TV program, and she was just very, very successful and very beautiful, and had lots of friends. And then she jumped off the balcony of her apartment in New York City, and everybody was just like so shocked. They didn't realize that she wasn't actually happy. So even though she had all of this, that other people would envy, but it was empty. She wasn't happy. So there's lots of stories like that. So we can use stories like that to understand that, sense objects, the pleasure that you experience with sense object is not really that satisfying. It's limited, lets you down. Okay, so we should stop there. I'll carry on next week, talk about the other of these hindrances and what to do about them. But at least, what we can start with is observing them in our mind and seeing if we can recognize through our own experience how these states of mind are problematic, especially in our practice of meditation, but also in our life, not just in meditation, but they can also lead to a lot of problems in our life, in our relationships, and so on. Okay, so let's finish with dedication prayers.
May the world be happy, the years good, and grains increase, the Dharma flourish, every happiness and bliss arise, and every wish in the mind be fulfilled. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayer of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shavakas, Prateka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of the infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Munis' precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparably venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from mother living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, especially Venerable Sangye Khadro. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Effie, for hosting.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
all.
Venerable Law.
Bye.
Thank you,
night.
Venerable. Thank you, Effie.
Thank you, Venerable.